Imagine an exceptionally frigid midnight in Vienna, 1741, within a derelict shack in the slums. A composer who once enchanted all of Europe and held the nobility in thrall lies solitary amidst moldering blankets. Beside him are but a few tattered scores and a violin with snapped strings, as delicate snowflakes drift past the window. Who could have surmised that this vagrant, perishing in abject poverty, was the very Red Priest who once reigned over the golden age of Venice? Antonio Vivaldi. Tonight, by the rhythmic flicker of the hearth and through this narrative meant to be felt rather than merely memorized, let us step into the true odyssey of his life. He was the pride of the city of water, the soul who composed sacred melodies amidst the echoes of damp canals for thousands of foundlings. His life mirrored his own four seasons: the efflorescence of spring, the tempestuousness of summer, the opulence of autumn, and finally, the boundless desolation and silence of winter. Within the walls of Venice's orphanage, the Ospedale della Pietà, the narrative unfurls its most tender chapter. Though Venice then was a dream of opulence, beneath its magnificent masks lay lives abandoned by the canal side. These girls, known as the foundlings, were immured behind high walls by society from birth. Antonio Vivaldi, the priest who could not chant mass due to his asthma, entered this world with his violin. Gaze meeting the timidity and desolation in the girls' eyes, he realized the bow in his hand might be the solitary spark to pierce their darkness. He taught them more than mere scales and fingerings, he tailored for them a sacred discipline. Each dawn, as mist still swathed St. Mark's Square, the practice rooms echoed with the delicate plucking of strings. Vivaldi's iconic red hair resembled an eternal flame under the dim candlelight. Temperamental and eccentric, he was at times severe to the point of obsession, and at others, he would wear a childlike smile at a melodic turn. He understood that these children possessed neither lineage nor property, not even a complete name, only music could grant them the dignity to stand in this world. Thus, within those stone walls corroded by sea salt, he began to deduce melodies that would transcend time and space, attempting to build a pure island of notes within this decadent city. As his compositions matured, this orphanage unexpectedly became a site of secret pilgrimage for the royalty and nobility of Europe. The etiquette of the era dictated that these foundling girls perform behind metal grills on the second floor, often shrouded by heavy veils. The audience below could discern only the swan-like elegance of their silhouettes, swaying to the rhythm within translucent shadows. Antonio Vivaldi stood at the fore, wielding his baton. What flowed through the air was no longer the moan of the destitute, but celestial harmonies capable of moving the divine. These musicians, heralded as Vivaldi's protégés, learned under his tutelage to mimic summer thunderstorms and vernal birdsong upon their strings. At the conclusion of every performance, the Venetian elite would frantically shower the stage with gold coins, desperate to uncover the truth behind the veils, yet Vivaldi would always silently gather his scores and lead the girls back into the shadows. He was well aware of the hypocrisy underlying such adulation. He cared far more whether these girls, practicing alone in the dead of night, had found the courage to face their fates. Much of the inspiration for his famed Four Seasons was drawn from the girls' yearning for the vistas beyond their windows. Within the walls they could never leave, he used notes to construct the entirety of nature's cycle for them. This was his most clandestine mercy as a priest. If the world denied them freedom, he would create for them a boundless realm through his movements. However, the prosperity of Venice was essentially a fragile loan. As the aesthetic tides of the era shifted, Vivaldi began to feel the chill of power. With the burgeoning of classicism, the intricate, ornate, and intensely dramatic expressions of the Baroque were increasingly dismissed by the rising aristocracy as stale and pedantic. Antonio Vivaldi, once the darling of the city, faced unprecedented coldness in the opera houses of Venice. People began to mock his interminable allegros and question his seemingly outmoded creative fervor. More painful still was the gradual slashing of the orphanage's budget. Officials who once revered him as a deity began to whisper behind his back about his eccentricities and scandalous rumors. He realized he had become a redundant piece of old furniture in the city's accelerating descent. He began to walk the Rialto Bridge alone at night, watching the black water reflect the fractured moonlight, as the internal order of his soul underwent a violent upheaval. He did not compromise. He remained steadfast in his exquisitely flamboyant style, which to others appeared merely as the final struggle of a fading hero. This disillusionment, precipitated by reason, caused his health to fail frequently. Asthma, like a venomous serpent, constricted his throat day and night. He understood that Venice no longer required his miracles. He had to find another sanctuary for his soul before the inevitable withering day. In 1740, the 62-year-old Antonio Vivaldi made the most desperate gamble of his life, selling all his possessions to journey to Vienna. Carrying trunks of heavy scores, he crossed the Alps during a season of lashing storms. He pinned his hopes on Emperor Charles VI, who had long admired his work, seeking to restart his spring in Vienna. Yet, fate once again revealed its cruelest sense of humor. Shortly after his arrival, Charles VI unexpectedly passed away. The entire city plunged into national mourning, all concerts were cancelled, and the doors of society were bolted shut. Vivaldi found himself utterly abandoned in a foreign land of harsh climate and unfamiliar tongue. Residing in a meager tenement and lacking the coin for coal, he was forced to cover himself with moldy newspapers and musical parchment for warmth. The hands that once set the Venetian canals ablaze were now swollen and cracked by the frost. He watched as the concertos he had poured his lifeblood into were sold as scrap paper by local servants. His eyes gradually shed all anger, leaving only a void of profound serenity. On his final sickbed, he continued to weave melodies in his mind, but those notes were no longer the joy of spring, but the soundless silence of winter snow. This fall from the summit to the abyss allowed his life, before its final extinguishing, to radiate a dignity as tragic and pristine as a wilting rose. He was no longer the world-renowned Red Priest, he was merely pure music, returning its borrowed flesh in abject poverty. On a morning in July 1741, Antonio Vivaldi closed his eyes forever in the slums of Vienna. When the news reached Venice, the carnival was still in full, tumultuous swing. No one noticed that the man who had once bestowed a soul upon the city had vanished. His funeral in Vienna was categorized as the lowest class, with no orchestra to play. Only 6 children from the slums carried his simple black wooden coffin toward a remote cemetery. He answered the question posed in the prologue: was the weight of that solitude heavy? In truth, the heaviest burden was not the solitude, but the ultimate loyalty to beauty that never degraded even in destitution. Do you now feel it, the cool, stable tranquility, like a Venetian mist, reaching across 3 centuries? The golden age of Venice has long since passed, and the music of the Pietà has returned to the earth. Only Vivaldi's mercy in watching over the foundlings remains in the deep midnight of history, like a faint lamp that refuses to be extinguished. This is a power that requires no words, the finality of the Red Priest. Tonight, may you drift into sleep to the cycle of the seasons in Vivaldi's movements, accompanied by the peace born of his absolute composure. The world is quiet now. You should also lay down the distractions of reality. Good night.